There it hangs, suspended in gloom, glowing dimly in darkness. A beacon there to inform us that there is always a way out. But don't go just yet. We have such wonderful things to show you. This is the Exit Light Podcast.
Hello there, listener. Happy New Year. It's the Exit Light Podcast, Season 3. I am your storyteller, Eli Beals. While the show has not been active, I certainly have been, writing new stories to share with you, and wrapping up other projects, such as Volume 2 of the Exit Light Collection, and a new publication for Horrific Tales, Volume 4, Eldritch Terror. Links to these works can be found at exitlightpodcast.com if you would like to support the efforts of independent creators like myself and the wonderful Horrific team. In the first tale of the year, we meet some guys, bros, if you will, that call themselves the Wolfpack. What happens when they encounter the real thing?
The Wolfpack, written by Eli Beals. They referred to themselves as the Wolfpack. Like many guys of their particular stripe, they had a rudimentary understanding of wolf politics, in the sense that even though they were all badasses, only one could be the alpha. Jay was the biggest, and had the nicest car, so it could not have been any clearer than that, as far as his pack was concerned. Jay was a natural leader, and for the most part, the pack trusted his judgment. Wolf politics aside, the man had his charms. They were only half serious about it, but this rank and file made things simple for them. If Jay said they were spending winter break in the snow, to the snow they would go. There was no deliberation about it. "Oh man, I think we hit a dead zone," Byron said amidst the heavy bass line that was threatening to rattle the SUV apart. Despite the excessive decibel levels, one of his two friends up front heard him just fine. "Yeah, bro, we in the wilderness." Cam let out a primal howl that emphasized just how wild it was. "No, bro, the call cut out before I could... Hey!" Byron tapped the thick shoulder of the driver, who turned slightly to eye him from his peripheral. "Jay, turn it down a sec." Jay grinned, and for a moment blasted that bass even harder before bringing it down to a much lower level so they didn't have to scream at each other. "The ladies don't know where the spot is." "What? You were back there talking to them for like an hour, bro." "So? Point is, call dropped before I could send them the link. So like, can you turn back till I get some bars?" It's just a dead spot. Chill," Jay said promptly, ending the conversation by cranking up the music to its normal, bone-shaking setting. "Dick," Byron said. If Jay had heard him, he didn't react. His phone, now about as useful as a light-up paperweight, returned to its usual slot in his bandolier-style fanny pack. He looked out at this wilderness Cam was so hyped about. He liked his friends, but considering all the snow and seclusion, made him wonder if he could tolerate spending several days with them without his favorite distractions, namely, of the female variety. Byron had his misgivings about this, but then he had never been outside an area that did not have a liquor store and at least 8 Starbucks in a 12-block radius. At last, the big SUV turned off the highway onto a slower road, trailing to their destination. Poking up from a field of white like an arrowhead, stood a lone 3-story A-frame cabin. Jay cut the engine and the sudden absence of aggressive drum beats put the absolute quiet into stark contrast. Like astronauts landing on the moon for the first time, they emerged from their capsule and into the indifferent world they had so glibly called the wilderness. Byron was glad to breathe the crisp air. There was a purity to it possessed of a sweetness in comparison to the cloying, dude smell of the SUV. For a moment he just stood there taking in the scenery, as if allowing the panorama of distant hills and snow-capped forest to exist, to confirm that yes, indeed, he was here, in this place. His meditation was interrupted by a soft impact to his shoulder that emitted a piff sound, followed by a cackle from Cam, who was already rolling up another snowball. The two of them traded volleys back and forth until Jay emerged from the cabin. "Yo!" was all he needed to say to effect a ceasefire and to direct them to the grunt's task of hauling the load in the back of the SUV to the awaiting cabin. Most of their cargo was liquid, several cases of beer, and a few plastic crates loaded with high-proof whiskey and flavored vodkas. Enough for an average weekend, and then some. Jay busied himself with the generator, leaving the other two to their task. A snow mound near the entrance served as a means to chill a warm six-pack faster than the almost full refrigerator inside could. He loved the way the stuff crunched and seemed to mold perfectly around the cylinders and hold them there, and for a second just marveled at the wondrous properties of water and all of its forms. Then he saw the tracks. They trailed a path that lassoed out from the dense march of fir trees to surround the property. He followed the loop to where they seemed to converge and gave out a little chuckle when he saw the trash bins. Animals of various sizes had tried and failed to raid the critter-proofed containers, which looked no worse for wear. Byron was no expert on the matter, but amongst various impressions in snow and muddy slush, he thought of wolves. A howl right over his shoulder nearly shook him from his skin, simultaneously whirling and flailing out at the sound, only to collide with Cam, whose howl was cut short with an unintended but well-placed punch to the gut. "Oh shit, Cam. What the hell?" Byron was still buzzing with adrenaline. "Jeez, bro." Cam wheezed, trying to get his breath back. "Sorry, man." A distant answering howl cut in, followed by another, then joined by a chorus triggering a primal reaction in them, invoking their ancient forebears and their survival instincts. For a moment they froze and stared into the haze of wilderness, imagining hungry shapes prowling in the shadows of the forest. The impulse to be indoors seemed to slap them across their faces, and without another glance, they made their way around and went inside. Safety in the form of walls and thick insulated glass erased their momentary lapse into terrified primates, and were soon laughing about it, allowing their masculinity to take the reins again. Even more assuring was that the power was flowing. The fridge hummed, lights flickered on, and Jay entered with a satisfied grin like the thunder god himself. They gathered in the den, each holding a tall can of beer in their left hand, and in their right, a small shot glass, filled to the brim with all-American Kentucky bourbon. Together they raised their open cans, then, like synchronized barflies, gulped the bourbon and chased it with 24 ounces of suds. Jay belched, then gave out a satisfied bellow, initiating a response from his two companions. Once this ritual known as the toast was complete, and a sufficient amount of howling and grunting was performed, they turned to other matters. "Oh, hey, there we go. Got a signal now. Must be a booster here or something." Byron said happily, but his smile soon vanished when he began to scroll through his messages. Roads closed. The girls decided to turn back and go to Squaw Valley. Aw, fuck, you serious? Cam whined as if it were Byron's fault. They brought chains, so I don't know, man. Road's closed, it's closed, I guess. Whatever. More for us then, right? Jay said like a captain rallying his troops. They watched bootleg recordings of various mixed martial arts bouts on the widescreen while depleting the hoard of booze with an almost determined pace. Things progressed as they usually did in such circumstances. As the overall intoxication increased, the level of inhibition decreased, meaning they were starting to get stupid drunk. Byron was becoming less and less tolerant of Jay's bragging and constant reenactments of the events on screen. Most of this was focused on Cam, who was smaller than the other two and seemed to have more to prove. Inevitably, things went too far, and Jay received a genuine blow from Cam that sent his rage dial to maximum. Jay shoved Cam so hard that he left the ground for a second before pinwheeling right into Byron, whose nose then got intimately acquainted with one of Cam's elbows, and then it was Byron who was seeing red. Cut the shit out, bro. Byron stood up, shoving Cam into the couch, blood pouring from his flaring nostrils. Ho ho! Did I poke the bear? Jay said, grinning, as if he'd been waiting for this since he met Byron. Then he assumed a fighter stance exactly like the guy currently on screen, legs apart, elbows pointed down and ready for war. Byron removed his t-shirt, now soaked in a vertical strip of red. He used this to wipe off his face and clear out his sinuses. His nose wasn't broken, but he was pissed about the shirt and ready to take Jay down a peg. But not here. Outside, Byron growled. Not willing to risk losing face, Jay dropped his arms and shrugged. Sure, bro. I can kick your ass out in the snow, too. Whatever. Without dropping his gaze, he backed over to the front door and pushed it open, making a mocking gesture inviting Byron to go out first. Without hesitation, Byron stalked out, but not before getting nose to nose with Jay to say some choice threats. Maybe it was the amplified testosterone and lack of female company mixed with large amounts of alcohol that had them primed for violence. Or maybe they were finally concluding the long stretch of time sizing each other up. Both of them wondered what this would be like, and they were glad to be finally getting this out of the way. For a moment the two of them stood under the moonlight, body heat wisping away from them in the cold, dry air like ghosts. Then one of the floodlights turned on, and they both turned to see Cam holding up his phone, ready to get some good footage of this epic battle. Stakes are high now, Byron. Sure you want to do this? Jay said, resuming his stance. I'm live streaming, Cam yelled from the doorway. Yeah, let's do this, Byron said, and charged at Jay, dodging a premature punch by ducking, and was able to close in to wrap his arms around his opponent's hips. This would have been a perfect takedown, except that his foot slipped in the snow, and now his face was full of Jay's crotch. Trying to give me some head? Jay said as he gleefully brought a knee up into Byron's chest, then reached down to snag the mop of hair still pressed to his midsection. Byron managed a foothold and wheeled around Jay, dropping his grip to below the knees, then surged up and forward, effectively launching Jay face first into a snow mound with Byron on top of him. Oh shit! Takedown! Cam announced to his audience. Byron drove a forearm into the back of Jay's neck, pressing his face harder into the crunching snow. The more Jay tried to wriggle free, the deeper into the powder he got, and then his left hand was patting frantically at his side. Jay was tapping out. Byron stood back and watched as Jay rolled over, gasping for breath. After a moment, Jay looked up at Byron and smiled, indicating that all was forgiven, but then muttered, "Fucking lucky shot," that Byron pretended not to hear. Cam began howling his trademark howl for his audience, then rushed over to Byron to get a shot of him holding his hand up like a referee declaring a victory. Cam was silenced by a look from Jay. Then they all heard it. Howls, nearby, and lots of them. Then the darkness just outside the influence of the flood lamp flickered with dozens of bright, reflective eyes. After the howling dwindled, a lone shape emerged into the curve of light, a massive gray beast stepping casually forward. Its gaze leveled on the three. Even from this distance, they could see it regarding each of them in turn, as if taking inventory. The word Alpha registered clear in each of the humans' minds as it gave out a brief bark, and the rest of them emerged. This was their cue to make a hasty retreat, and so they hustled back inside the cabin. In the rush, Jay clipped Cam's side as he barreled by, sending the outstretched phone flying into the side of the cabin, then bouncing off into the snow. Byron grabbed Cam and redirected him towards the front door. "My phone, bro!" he cawed indignantly as Byron shut and locked the door behind him. "Get it when our new friends leave." "Dude, it's streaming. Data limit, you know?" "Relax," Byron said calmly as he went to the window to peer outside. "Just wait till they lose interest and move on." "What are you, some kind of wolfologist?" Cam said incredulously. "Yeah, as far as you know." "Fuck. Oh well," Cam said, then joined them at the window to gaze mournfully at the small glowing patch of snow where his phone rested. There were about a dozen of them, none quite as large as the first one to appear, but still larger than the average domestic dog. The guys watched in silent fascination as the pack of wolves loped nearer and began to circle the cabin. A few of them stopped right in front of them, then turned facing outward, threw their heads up at the sky, and howled. They snapped some video and pictures of this, then bored of the whole event entirely and resumed watching stuff on the widescreen. Not because they weren't perturbed by being surrounded by wolves, because they needed a distraction from the fact that they were now trapped and were not quite ready to confront this issue. With their interest in real competitive violence satiated, they settled for simple, over-the-top, fake violence, where a single man cuts down dozens of bad guys in hyper-stylized sequences over the death of a very cute puppy, which for all intents and purposes was totally justified. 3/4 through the film, the power jittered, then died altogether, following immediately by a collective groan, an abrupt reminder of their predicament. "I thought you put fuel in that Jenny," Cam said accusingly in Jay's direction. "I did. Maybe not enough. I don't know." "Is there more gas?" "Yeah, tons of it," Jay replied, like this was a stupid question that impinged on his foresight and logistics abilities. "The wolves aren't leaving. They're just standing there," Byron said from the window, silhouetted by moonlight. "Well, I guess it's just time to crank one out and hit the sack then, huh, boys?" The other two laughed, glad to have their leader back in his usual form. So they stumbled up the stairs in the dark, guided by phone light, or in Cam's case, a tiny Bic lighter. As Byron lay down, he found sleep elusive. The idea that if he fell asleep, the wolves parked outside would find a way in and tear the three of them to kibble kept him alert and restless. And also, that he was not in fact a wolfologist, if that was even a real term. but he did know that this was not common wolf behavior. Eventually accepting that there was nothing he could do about it, he slipped away into unconsciousness. Crashing thuds mingled with anguished cries rumbled up through the floorboards, causing Byron to wake with instant awareness. Without pause, he sprang from the bed and ran down the stairs, stopping when the other two were in view. Jay's bulk blocked most of Cam's smaller frame, but Byron could see his face, and from the terrified expression that he was in shock.
"What happened?"
Byron said while approaching. Jay turned to the sound of his voice, and when Byron saw Cam's right hand limp and cradled against his shoulder, dripping with blood, he guessed half of the story at least. For a moment, the guilty, wide-eyed expression flashed over Jay's face, then returned to his usual dispassionate, smirking composure.
"It's just a scratch. Cam thought he could get his phone, stupid ass."
Something in Cam's expression told Byron that wasn't exactly the case, but he remained quiet on the subject.
"I thought the wolves were asleep,"
Cam eventually said, breaking the staring contest going on between the two bigger guys.
"They were, until you stepped on one of them. I didn't see it, bro. Should have done what I said, bro."
Jay spat the word like an insult. Indeed, the wolves were still outside, posted like sentinels, occasionally twitching their ears at the sounds of particularly loud exclamations. From what he had heard already, it seemed as if Jay had coerced Cam to go refuel the generator, and as a reward could retrieve his beloved device. Since Jay wasn't offering anything in the way of an explanation or help to the injured Cam, Byron budged in.
"Come on, Cam. Gotta take care of that scratch."
Cam's eyes went first to Jay, then flicked to Byron, then down at the floor as he brushed by them towards the bathroom.
"This is gonna sting."
Byron held the square brown bottle of hydrogen peroxide over the seeping gash in Cam's hand. It wasn't a clean bite. It was a deep penetration into the thick muscles between the forefinger and thumb that tore out towards the webbing. Cam winced as the peroxide bubbled intensely in and around the hole in his hand.
"So what really happened?"
Byron asked, while applying a series of wound closure strips.
"Wolf bit me, but not the one I stepped on. It was the big one. Fuck, man, I thought I was gonna piss myself when it jumped at me. Yeah, that one's huge. The hole in your hand is the size of a dime, probably needs stitches. Just try not to move it too much." It's weird, though. I don't think it was trying to hurt me, like it was trying to pull me back,
Cam added. Byron thought about this while wrapping the clean and dressed wound with gauze.
"Yeah, it's weird. Don't worry, bro. We'll figure something out,"
he reassured his friend. There were other concerns, of course, infection being just one of them, but he didn't want to freak Cam out. He would just try and keep tabs on him if it seemed to be going that way. Jay was pacing in front of the window. Every few steps or so, he'd smack the glass with a knuckle to get a response from the pack outside. When this ceased to get a rise from their furry captors, he began to pound the glass hard enough to shake the walls.
"Get the fuck out of here!"
he yelled, as one of them gave him the slightest of glances, then resumed their vigil outward.
"I don't get it,"
Byron said as he came up beside Jay.
"It's like they just want us to stay inside. They could have easily killed Cam." "Okay, Mr. Wolfologist. What should we do, huh? No signal to call anyone."
He waved his cell phone in Byron's face.
"Can't get power unless we fuel the generator, so we can make a fucking phone call." "I know, but we can't, so forget it until they leave." "What if they don't leave?"
This was the million-dollar question, and Byron had no answer for it. Seeing the doubt in his friend's eyes gave Jay the upper hand, and on general principle, the right to decide what was to be done.
"If they don't leave, We'll make them leave,
Jay said as his gaze slid to the crate still brimming with liquor bottles. He made sure to shoulder check his subordinate as he went to the counter to see what he had to work with, picking bottles with the highest proof with names like Everclear and Moonshine, and a few that were unlabeled. These he unscrewed and sniffed at them judiciously, adding 2 of these to the group.
Molotov cocktails? Yeah, bro. Nothing like the smell of napalm in the morning,
Jay replied, then began to rummage around in the cabinets, shoving aside various canned goods and random boxes of pasta, until he found what he was looking for: a shrink-wrapped package of Sterno and powdered coffee creamer.
Don't just stand there, fucking help me out here. What's with the coffee creamer? Check it out.
Jay poured a small amount onto the counter, then flicked a lighter and brought it to the stuff. It immediately flared up into a bright orange flame. Byron had to admit this was pretty cool, and with Jay's instruction began to pipe the gelatinous stove-fuel coffee creamer mixture into the bottles. Cam was excused from assembly due to his injury, and so he just watched and pelted Jay with questions such as, "What's that for? And how does that work? How do you even know how to do this, bro?" Leading to the biggest question: what was the plan? 8 bottles filled with semi-opaque, not quite set Jell-O fluid with strips of cloth protruding from them were displayed proudly by Jay.
Okay, so we just throw these down at them, right? They run off, we get in the car and go.
Byron was impressed, despite his doubts that these Molotov cocktails would work as intended. But it was better than just sitting around doing nothing. As much as Cam wanted to be present for the action, Jay assigned him light duty, as in to stay downstairs and be ready to run. Byron followed Jay upstairs with an armful of ordnance and a grim determination to do his best not to drop any of them. Jay stood out on the deck that overlooked the driveway, staring down at the group of watchful faces looking right back at him in the fading light.
Hey fuckers, take a look at this,
he yelled while lighting the wick, then hurled it down in the midst of them. A fireball erupted upon impact, scattering blobs of flaming goo in all directions. The wolves yelped and bounded away from the sudden threat, and one was not so lucky. Covered in fast-burning accelerant, it howled and rolled in the snow until it was still and smoldering in the dusk. Byron handed Jay another bottle. The wolves that didn't flat-out flee were now huddled behind the big SUV, poking their strangely intelligent faces out every now and then as if to say, "Go ahead, try and get us now."
"Oh, fuck,"
was all Jay could say to define the current predicament, then shrugged and flicked the lighter with intent to resume fire anyway.
"Wait, not the car, bro."
Byron threw out an arm to intercept the bottle, getting a finger on it as it left Jay's throwing arm, sending it spinning and wobbling, casting off sputtering gobs, some of it splattering Jay, sending him into immediate stop, drop, and roll procedures. The rest of the cocktail landed and exploded dangerously close to the shed where all the gasoline was stored for the generator.
"Dude, what the fuck?"
Jay got to his feet and shoved Byron, ready for round 2, and perhaps a little payback. Before Byron could answer, a deep resonating drone that rose and pitch pealed through the air, then abruptly stopped, leaving them stunned and wide-eyed. The wolves below emerged from their cover and began to howl in unison in the direction that sound came from. Forgetting their quarrel, the 2 of them bounded downstairs to gather a few things and almost forgot Cam, who was pressed to the window agape.
"Did you guys hear that? What the hell was that?" "Come on, let's get out of here while we can,"
Byron said, unlatching the deadbolt and throwing the door open. Jay went out first, armed with a cocktail and a ready lighter in case the beasts changed their minds. The other 2 followed and rushed to the SUV, watching the posteriors of the wolves warily as they passed them. Jay didn't even wait for Cam to close his door before he was backing down the driveway, causing the door to swing even wider and threatening to snap right off its hinges. Cranking the wheel sharply to the left put the big truck into a spin that caused the open door to slam shut, nearly severing Cam's good hand in the process.
Whoa!
Cam exclaimed, shaking his hand as if burned. The SUV skidded to a sliding stop in the slush, and they were finally able to breathe again. From the safety of the vehicle, they looked out at the line of wolves facing the blackness of the woods beyond and howling. Then an explosion lit up the sky. It seemed that the last burning cocktail had found the cache of fuel inside the shed. Its shockwave caused the SUV to sway momentarily, as well as caused the wolves to crouch, their fur rippling in the sudden blast of superheated air. Then, in the brilliant illumination, the guys saw the trees move apart, as if something enormous had just shoved them away to advance and unleash another bone-shaking roar. The moon and surrounding stars were blotted out by the shape of it, as it rose twice as high as the tallest of the trees, and it roared again. Go, 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 go! Cam and Byron shouted, urging Jay to break from his stupor. Jay thankfully snapped out of it, stomping the gas pedal hard, and they left the conflagration in the rear view. The only sounds were the steady thrum of the engine, their pounding hearts, and the steady, distant, mournful howls of the wolves.
This story was inspired by my experience at camp one summer long ago. I was not one of the cool kids, and for the most part, was simply ignored, which was fine. It certainly was better than being the object of adolescent cruelty, and being at camp was a slightly more rugged version of grade school, except I had to sleep in the same cabin as my classmates. The same routine, slightly better food, and with more trees. That is until our cabin leader took us out on a flashlight hike, miles away from civilization and the illusion of safety it provides. How the tables turned. These once self-assured tough kids were soon crying for their mommies, yet I was perfectly comfortable. For a little while I enjoyed this feeling of superiority, if only because I was anything but scared. The night sky above the trees was bright with stars, and it was quiet, save for the occasional snap of a branch somewhere in the forest. Maybe I could have antagonized them in this moment of vulnerability, but I didn't. That's not what camping is about. You help each other. So that's what I did. Of course, we all returned safely, but something had changed in those few hours, and suddenly I wasn't the weird, quiet kid who spent most of the time in the arts and crafts house. I was accepted. I realized something then that perhaps I could not articulate, is that in the darkness is where you can truly see people for who they really are. Until next time, listener, good night.